Here's the stretch by Robinson. The 3-0 pitch. Swing a long drive. There it is. Number 500. The career 500th home run for Michael Jack Schmidt. And the Phillies have regained the lead in Pittsburgh. 8-6. And the Phillies dugout comes swarming out to home plate.
Phillies Talk Podcast is now listener supported. Just go to our Patreon page at Patreon, patreon.com/Phillies, and you can sponsor this podcast.
Welcome to Phillies Talk, the independent podcast from FightinPhillies.com, featuring news and views about Phillies baseball.
Hi, this is Gary Matthews. You listen to the Fightin' Phillies podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Phillies Talk Podcast. Well, it's nearly the end of June, and well, I wish I had better news to report about the Phillies. And just every game that goes on now, it just seems like something new is happening with this team, and it's not good news. The other night in Arizona, we had Nick Pivetta getting his fourth loss of the season as the Phillies closed out a set with the Arizona Diamondbacks. They fell to 24-51 on the year, and there was just an article out today that says, of course, that the Phillies are on pace to possibly lose 110 games, and that's very hard to believe. I have to echo the sentiments of Freddie Galvis, who recently made a quote that he said, in spring training, if you were to tell me we were going to have this record, I wouldn't believe it. And I think about 100 to 200,000 Phillies fans in the tri-state area would have to agree with him. I never really believed that the Phillies could possibly be this bad. I was looking at close to a 500 season. Maybe I had some rose-colored glasses on with this team, and I was buying into the hype a little bit. Maybe that last year they all worked together for the most part, being Galvis, Herrera, and Franco, and I kind of felt with Altair getting into the mix. Of course, he didn't get into the mix until about a third of the season, or a quarter of the season. He didn't start with the Phillies, but I thought that those young group of players would really start to gel and start to promote one another to do better. I really did. I thought this Phillies team would have a better pitching staff than it does. Of course, they had a couple injuries to some starters. Clay Buchholz lost for the season, and I would have liked to have seen how he would have worked out with the Phillies this year. Aaron Nola's been struggling a little bit, although recently he's been getting a little better. He'll lead off in Game 1 when the Phillies are starting out in Seattle for just a quick 2-game series. And, of course, if you remember last month in May, the Seattle Mariners visited Citizens Bank Park along with Chooch, Carlos Ruiz, and Ruiz banged home 4 RBIs in game number 2 in the short series back in May when the Mariners swept the Phillies in both games. So maybe the Phillies can return the favor here out in Seattle, but they're going to be facing the top 2 pitchers that Seattle has on the franchise. Felix Hernandez, we've often heard of him in the Philadelphia area, in the baseball world. It's been kind of quiet with Seattle, hasn't really done that greatly with them. They signed him for a ton of years, but the Phillies will be facing him in Game 2 in this series. So, again, the Phillies have their work cut out for them. The season's not going to get any easier for them. I know on my Twitter feed, which is at Fightin' Phillies, that's Fighttin, Phillies, Phillies. You can follow me there on Twitter. I had tweeted out that a few days ago that the Phillies had 90 games remaining, and if they won half of those games, the Phillies would end up with only 69 wins on the year. So I don't think that's going to happen with this team. I could easily see them now losing at least 3/4 of the 90 games the way they're playing, unless something happens to turn around. And I think we've been waiting for that time to happen every week now since probably the middle of May. This team took a turn when it went on a West Coast trip out to L.A., and it's never returned from that bad turn that it's taken. The team has slid down the mountain just about as far as you can go. Currently the worst team in the majors at 24-51. And what can you say? You can say that Pete Mackanin needs to be fired. They need to really bring a new manager in with this team. You could make good points and points against that. Of course, it's the players on the field that are losing. But, maybe under new management, some of these guys will get a different perspective and a couple different reasons to go out there and play under a new manager. I mean, everybody seems to like Pete Mackanin. He's a great guy, has been in baseball all his life. But you have to look at reality with this team. It's not doing well. It didn't do well last year. A lot of people thought that the team was going to improve. But if you look at the way they finished up last year, it really was a bad thing all around for this team. So we'll have to see what direction Matt Klentak wants to take this team. It's still pre-All-Star game. A lot of things tend to happen around the All-Star break and shortly after. A lot of player movements. We'll have to see if the Phillies deal a couple players. It's been rumored that Franco is now available more than ever. And I think last year, if you kind of said that, that would have been fighting words for some people. Michael Franco on the trading block. A lot of fans would have been arguing with you on that one, but now maybe not so much. It seems like he's reached sort of like Dominic Brown status with some Phillies fans. And he really made a turn to the bad with this team. He used to be somebody that was a real solid bat in the lineup. You could basically count on him for a lot of the Phillies offense, but for whatever reason, he's been struggling mightily at the plate, along with several other Phillies. He's not the only one. Obadel Herrera has been turning in some subpar performances so far this year, and that's putting it nicely. He's been not being what you would expect from a Major League Baseball player at certain times on the field, not hustling a lot. And I don't think it's on purpose. Maybe he forgets where he's at right now. He does have the only Phillies contract that survives beyond this year. And that's kind of hard to believe. How can you build a team when you've got one player signed for next year in 2018? There's been rumors that Matt Klentak wants to go out and sign some free agents in the offseason, but where do you start? And is that the proper way that the Phillies are going to retool this team? They do have plenty of money, apparently, from the television contract. They haven't been spending it, that's for sure. They brought a few free agents in and a couple players sent away. Of course, Michael Saunders and Jeanmar Gomez, both gone, and both of those guys are now looking for jobs. And I think they'll probably find a job somewhere in the major leagues. It'll be interesting to see if Gomez gets picked up anywhere. If he's not still a closer, then he might be a setup guy somewhere. I think the Phillies completely lost faith in him, And it makes it tough on a player if a team is perceiving you as a guy that they can't count on anymore, a guy that can't get the job done. So you're going to go out on the mound and, that's going to be in the back of your mind most of the time. It seems like it was that way with Gomez. He did so much better last year and the previous season. It's hard to believe that he's the same player that we saw just a year ago. So the Phillies starting out with their 2-game series in Seattle, and then we're going to jump on a plane over in Seattle and take it about 2,800 miles or so and land in New York and play the New York Mets for a 3-game weekend series coming up. And I'm going to have a special guest blogger, podcaster, the great Mr. Gary Mack will join us soon on the show when I bring him on. And gosh, we last talked to him when the Mets were doing quite a bit better, and the Phillies were still so-so. They weren't doing that great. Gary's just an awesome guy. He does a wonderful job on a couple of podcasts he does. He does a lot of work with me on baseballtalkradio.com, and my co-host on another show we do called The Baseball Talk Radio Show. Yeah, you got to check that out if you haven't checked it out already. Check us out on iTunes. And also, we do a video version of the show, if you'd like to check that out as well. So we're going to bring him on in just a minute after we talk a little bit about this Seattle Mariners series. Well, as I was saying, the Phillies play that brief 2-game series in Seattle before they head back east and face the New York Mets. And I'm kind of looking forward to the Mets series much more than the Seattle Mariners series. Interleague play, I am not a big fan of. Occasionally, I liked it a few years ago when it first started. You get to see some of the players that you hardly ever see if you're a National League fan, which I am. You get some of your, Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim in and teams like that. Even the Mariners, and I've seen them a couple times play the Phillies. I think it's just an idea that's well beyond its time now with this interleague play. And, of course, the Phillies don't fare too well in interleague play as well. Not that they would this year because they aren't playing that well, but in general they haven't played interleague baseball that well over the years. And as luck would have it, I'm doing this podcast in a couple of different segments so I can report the first game the Phillies were winners in. Surprise, surprise, surprise. Phillies won that one 8-2 against the Mariners, and it was a late night game. It was a 10-10 start out there in Seattle at Safeco Field. I'll be honest with you, I did not stay up to watch not an inning of this. I had to get up early in the morning. My sleep was more important to me, but I kind of had a feeling that the Phillies might beat the Mariners in this game. And Aaron Nola earned his 5th win of the season. He beat James Paxton, who dropped down to 5-3 on the year. So the Phillies occasionally can show that they have some chutzpah to them. No other way to say it. Freddie Galvis got loud the other day. He mentioned that, why are the Phillies playing so bad? It took them to almost the All-Star game now to get to this point, but finally somebody showed a little emotion, a little fiery emotion on this Phillies team. Franco picked it up. He had a couple hits in the game in this win, this 8-2 win in the first game of the Seattle Mariners 2-game set out there. And Freddie Galvis went 3 for 5 with 2 RBIs in this game. So he really backed up his talk, and maybe he's spurring some of his teammates on a little bit with this, finally getting to the point of saying something. And sometimes that's better than the manager getting on players because it's one of your own is complaining. So, especially if you go out there and show that, hey, I'm going to try my best, I'm going to knock in a couple runs. These other guys followed suit, and the Phillies picked up a much-needed win. It's hard to believe, again, it's only their 25th win of the season so far. They've doubled that in losses. And I'm also reporting on the second game here as I'm doing this podcast in a few segments before I bring my guest on to talk about the upcoming weekend series in New York here at the end of June 2017. So the Phillies just tied up the second game as I'm reporting this, 4-4 with a Tommy Joseph home run in the ninth inning. And what a surprise. I mean, you almost had to believe that the Phillies weren't going to have a chance in this game. They had a few innings to get a hit, and they hadn't had a hit in 4 innings going into the top of the ninth there. So Tommy Joseph tied it up. Phillies right now, as I'm doing this podcast, tied up in Seattle. So if they can get the Mariners out in the bottom of the ninth, they're going to go to extra innings for the 7th time since June 12th. And that's a lot of extra inning games in a short amount of time for the Phillies. Of course, the bad news is they've lost all 6 of their extra inning games since June the 12th. It's kind of hard to believe as well. You'd figure they get lucky a little bit here or there, but the Phillies have not been able to do that in the month of June anyway, in all these extra inning games. So Mark Leiter Jr. is off the hook. He will not get the loss in this game. His ERA is sitting at 4.20 as of the time I'm doing this podcast. He gave up 3 long balls today, 3 home runs. He had 6 strikeouts. 4 earned runs was the final line on Mr. Leiter Jr. And, he kept the Phillies in this ball game for the most part. It was a low-scoring game up until the 9th here where the Phillies tied it up 4-4. So we'll have to see how they finish out in Seattle here. And I'm going to take a small break in the podcast. We're going to hear a couple of messages. And then we're going to come back on the other side and talk to Mr. Gary Mack. He's from Mets Musings podcast. If you listen to this show, you've heard him several times before. And also, as I mentioned before, he's my co-host and actually great host of that show as well. I'm his co-host most of the time, called the Baseball Talk Radio Show. So check that out as well over at iTunes and Stitcher Radio. It's the Baseball Talk Radio Show. We'll be right back after this message.
Sponsor an ad on the Phillies Talk podcast. Support our show and let people know about your business. Email us today. Follow us on Twitter at Fightin' Phillies or on our website, fightinphillies.com.
Hi, this is Farley.
And Mark from Baseball PhD.
Thanks for listening to BaseballPodcast.net.
Up next, another great episode of Phillies Talk.
Hi, this is Gary Matthews. You're listening to Fightin' Phillies Talk Podcast.
Brewtown Sports is your source for Brewers news and notes. Join Mr. Brewtown as he keeps you up to date on all the happenings of your Milwaukee Brewers and Major League Baseball. Follow the show on Facebook and Twitter, Brewtown Sports. Listen 24/7 at BrewtownSports.podomatic.com.
Hi, this is Gary Mack of Mets Musings, and you're listening to my good friend Rich Baxter on Phillies Talk, right here on BaseballTalkRadio.com, the home of great baseball talk shows.
And we're going to dip on down to Gotham City right now and invite Mr. Gary Mack aboard the show. Good evening, Gary.
Good evening, Mr. Baxter. How are you? It's so great to be on Phillies Talk again.
Well, it's great to have you on the show, and as some other shows, good generic time of the day, they'll say, during their podcasts, so we don't give away the time that we're doing it, but your Mets and the Phillies are going to collide in New York at Citi Field this weekend, coming up for a 3-game series. And, what a strange change of fortunes both teams have had.
I'll tell you, Rich, I think collide is a good name for it because, boy, I don't even know who to tell you is going to pitch or play the way the Mets players are dropping like flies with these injuries. it's just incredible. I mean, it's even reached the point where last night the announcer Ron Darling, the former Major League pitcher, really got disgusted and said on the air, and I agree with him 100%. And we've talked about injuries throughout baseball, but he practically said that the old trainers, Major League Baseball has to sit down the old trainers from 30, 40 years ago, the guys that are still alive, with some of these new trainers and figure out how to keep these players healthy because, they kept baseball players healthy, as he put it, and not six-pack wearing guys and muscle builders, but baseball players. And, he's right on the money. And the Mets lost another pitcher last night to a hamstring. And that's 4 of their starting 5 right now is on the DL. I mean, you've got Gesellman now, Harvey's there, Syndergaard, Wheeler's coming off of it, but he's technically still on it. They had Matson Lugo earlier in the year, so all of the starters except for DeGrom has been on this disabled list, and it's not simple injuries like a blister or something that gets healed right away. It's things that you're out for weeks with. So it's been a very tough year for the Mets, and as the Phillies, both teams came in with great ideas here that the Mets had thoughts of a World Series. The Phillies, I don't think thought that high, but they thought they could be a little higher. And so far, the season's been a bust for both teams.
Yes, it has been an incredible bust for the Phillies. And as you said, the Mets, they came into the season healthy, as most teams generally do out of spring training. They had high hopes. They had a great starting lineup going for them and a great offense. But lately that has deserted them, just as it has the Phillies. And not that the Phillies had a great starting rotation going into the 2017 series, but hey, I can report that they actually won Game 2 in Seattle now. They came back in the top of the ninth, scored 2 runs, and closed out this game in Seattle and finally swept the series. I'd have to go back to my calculator and my abacus to tell you how many series you'd have to go back to see when the Phillies have won a series. Of course, this was just a 2-game series all the way out in Seattle, but they travel back to New York. They have an off day, a day of rest there, waiting for the Mets to get back to town, and are down in beautiful Miami right now as we're doing the podcast. And the Mets, I've looked over their schedule a little bit, Gary, and they sort of get good for a couple games, and then they go south for 4 or 5.
Yeah, that seems to be the role that they're on this year. They'll, as you say, have a good, just for instance, West Coast road trip that they were on. They got swept badly in L.A. I mean, badly. I mean, the games weren't even close. They go to San Francisco, and then they sweep the Giants. Now, the Giants are a bad team, but, it's still, they're 2 years away from a World Series and a playoff berth last year. So, 3 years away from the World Series championship and a playoff berth. But they go to Miami last night and lose the game and look bad doing it. So it's been a very funny season. They lost 7 in a row at one point, then they won 5 in a row, and it's just there's no consistency. The pitches aren't going deep enough into game, the starters, when they've had all of their pitches that were healthy, which has been probably not even once. And the only guy that's playing any good ball is DeGrom, and he's the guy that's going, 8 innings or so into a game and delivering, and he's the ace of the staff. But the other guys, 5 innings. Last night, Gesellman gets hurt after 3. And it's been like that all season, and it's not a good way to run a ball club.
Yeah, and as you said, very inconsistent at times, but one Mets player that's really had a good year so far on offense has been Jay Bruce, and that's good for him because I know a lot of Met fans had lost faith in him He's leading the Mets right now with 20 home runs and 52 RBIs. And how do Mets fans and how do you feel about Jay Bruce? He's only 30 years old. He signed through the 2017 series with the Mets. Do you think he's going to stay with them maybe next year? Or?
Well, it's no secret that I was not a fan of Jay Bruce. I wasn't a fan of the trade. Not that I disliked the man personally, nothing like that. I just didn't think it was a good fit for the Mets last year. I didn't like the trade because I think it screwed up a lot of future plans, and I think it was a trade made out of panic. Same thing when they they picked up his option. I didn't think it was a good idea because I thought that money could have been well spent in the bullpen. That being said, he has been having a good offensive year. He is very streaky, and there are some things you can notice that it's not always, when he hits a home run, it's not always necessarily a win or in a key spot, but he has hit some in games in which they have won, so it would be unfair to say that none of his home runs have been big. There has been some big ones. But he is a streaky hitter, and that's one thing that's very difficult to predict with a team, having a streaky hitter. But he has been a very good bat in the lineup. Whether or not they sign him, the rumor is that they will try to trade him at the trade deadline. Now, I would even consider trying to trade someone like Cespedes if you could move him. I don't think you can. He's got a big contract. And then I would definitely keep Bruce because it would cost you a lot less money.
Very good. So we'll have to see what the Mets are planning. And we're just about 12 days, 13 days away from the All-Star break here. And I would imagine the Mets will possibly be a seller at that All-Star break, not looking to add on possibly with all the injuries that they've had. What do you see them doing around the trade deadline and around the All-Star game? Do you have any thoughts of them moving players or adding any players?
Well, they do have a number of expiring contracts, and there's probably some guys in that mix that would be attractive to another team. Lucas Duda, the first baseman, his contract is up. He would be attractive, I think, to a certain team that may need a power hitter coming down the stretch. Jay Bruce, who we just talked about, his contract is up. They may try to move him for the right kind of a piece. Curtis Granderson, who's been red hot lately, could be another guy that they could possibly move. Neil Walker, his contract's running up, but he's on a disabled list now, so I don't think he'll be back in time really to move. They do have until the end of July, so there is a possibility that he could be moved too. Struble Cabrera is another guy. He requested a trade last week because he was unhappy about moving to second base. And here's the funny thing, Rich. They moved him to second base. He was ticked off, and he had one of the best games of the year. Made like 3 or 4 terrific defensive plays. Went, I think, 3 for 4 in the game. I think he's playing second base tonight, and he just hit a 2-run homer. So maybe you ought to reconsider about not moving to second base because he seems to hit better when he's on second. Nonetheless, that's another guy that could be moved. As far as I'm concerned, there's very few untouchables on this team. One would be Michael Conforto, and the other probably would be Jacob deGrom, and everybody else can go. And I think they have to look at the future and not worry about what's happening now because they're too many pieces away from winning this year and next. And I think it's time to start restocking the farm system. And, if you can get somebody up a little higher for a blue chip player, then that's the way you have to go.
Very good analysis there. The Mets at 34-42 on the season. And as you said, they were on their elevator down. I doubt they're going to catch the Phillies. They've been just horrible this year. But maybe Matt Klentak should get together with Sandy Alderson. You mentioned a couple of good players that I'm sure the Phillies would love to have this team. So maybe those two guys can get together and we could pick up one of those free agents. It's been rumored that Matt Klentak wants to add a couple big-name players to this team, and he's going to need to. The Phillies have been horrible in the last 2 seasons. He doesn't have many options. His rebuilding plan hasn't went very well so far, and I just heard an interview this morning about Obadel Herrera and how he gets away with a lot of the antics that he's pulling on the field, as walking to first sometimes, not going to first if the ball's dropped by the catcher on other times, running through stop signs, just basically really major mistakes for a major leaguer to make. And Pete Mackanin answered, I've tried a lot of things with this player. I'm an old school guy. I've gotten in his face, sort of, and he's explained different methods that he's went about trying to counsel Obadel Herrera, but so far nothing has worked. So I'm sure maybe Herrera might be available for trade this year. I'd love to swap him for Granderson.
All right. Well, maybe we could do something about that. There's a lot of Lucas Duda would probably fit very nicely with the New York Yankees, but the Mets and the Yankees don't have a good history of trading directly with one another. So I doubt if that would work. But it would be a deal if they could work something out with a couple of the Yankee prospects that would pay off. The Yankees need a first baseman badly. His swing would be terrific in Yankee Stadium with that short right field porch, and so that would work out. Look, Washington, for that matter, I don't know if you'd want to make this trade to Washington, but they could use a closer. We could trade Addison Reed to them for something, and they pretty much depleted their minor leagues with getting Adam Eaton in last year's offseason, who promptly got hurt and is out for the season. So that was kind of a bust, that trade. But it's just who you want to trade with. The Mets have a history lately of making trades with Toronto and Atlanta, so maybe we'll see.
Yeah, we're well overdue to do a nice trade with the Mets. The Phillies have been back and forth a few times with the Mets on different trades, and we've mentioned this on previous shows. So we're overdue. Maybe this will be the year that they catch up and make one of those deals.
I don't